again and welcome back to my channel where I am once again going back to some bookish content after a series of vlogs. But I wanted to introduce to you guys the books that I read in October, which isn't that many because I really just took my time this October. I was very leisurely about my reading and I just, was enjoying the good weather that comes in the fall. And it was just, if I read, I read. If I don't, I don't. And it was just one of those months where it was a good time. It was nice. I did start off with a very quick read though, because this book was so engrossing. Just really, I could not put it down. And that was People Who Eat Darkness, the true story of a young woman who vanished from the streets of Tokyo and the evil that swallowed her up, by Richard Lloyd Parry. Richard Lloyd Parry is a journalist, a British journalist, and I've already read his nonfiction Ghosts of the Tsunami, which is about the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami, which is incredibly depressing, but I mean, what else was there to be expected from that book? But it was very well written, and so I wanted to read this book, which is about this young English woman. I believe she was 21 years old, and her name is Lucy Blackman, and she came to Japan sort of to kind of explore her life, just sort of, she didn't quite know what she wanted to do, she didn't like what she was doing, so she came to Japan to sort of do this new adventure on the encouragement of a friend. And she comes to Japan, and 3 months later she disappears. She just disappears, and no one knows what happens to her. But there's a random phone call that her friend / roommate received, saying that she had been inducted into a cult, and that she was giving up her previous life, and that they should totally forget that Lucy existed, because she was never going to come back to her previous life. And her friend couldn't believe that to be true, and Lucy's family back in England also could not believe that to be true. They believed that something much more sinister had happened. And this book is about that. And this is, it's crazy. It's not even crazy because it's some sort of like a crazy Illuminati backstory kind of thing like that. It's crazy in that sense, but it's the crazy in the sense of evil that you get out of this book, and sort of the sense of frustration and hopelessness, and the sense that Japanese bureaucracy, which is very famous for being a little bit incompetent, and how their incompetency led to Lucy Blackman basically getting the sort that came to her, because basically the police could have stopped what was going to happen to her a long time ago, but because of the laws in Japan, and because of sort of the belief that such bad things can't happen in Japan, won't happen in Japan, sort of led them to sort of ignore a lot of clues, ignore a lot of warnings about what could happen. So this was incredibly fascinating. I could not stop turning the pages. It was really interesting to see how the police work in Japan. It's really interesting to see the sort of the influence that foreign media can have in Japan in terms of like pushing the police to sort of actually do their job, to put it mildly. The justice system in Japan, that was really fascinating in terms of how someone won't be tried at court unless they're basically 100% proven guilty. So the reason for there being such a high conviction rate in Japan is because you don't go to court unless you're basically guilty. So that was really fascinating, because this was actually one of the rare cases where the police struggled to prove that the person in the question, the suspect in question, was guilty, even though there was all this evidence against him. So that was really interesting, especially coming from the US, where you're basically the saying is you're innocent until you're proven guilty, while in Japan you're basically guilty if we state that you are. So that was very fascinating. it was interesting to see the backstory of Lucy Blackman's family. Because in this book you feel pity for her, but at the same time, I mean, she's not really the best of people. Her family is a standard family. There are issues in it. They could be good people. They might not be good people. It just depends. I mean, everybody has different sides to them. But it's just interesting how the author sort of, pulls you through the story about, how her personality was kind of this way. So some people do think, oh, she deserved her fate. She deserved what she got to her. She came to Japan to work in the red light district, not as a prostitute, but as a hostess, which is a job here in Japan where you sort of you drink and you talk with customers and you just give them, you kind of praise them and you increase their morale. And one thing about this book that was very, very interesting in terms of being a foreigner here in Japan, and I don't really have the issue because I do speak Japanese, and most of my friends, basically, well, all my friends are Japanese, so I am very much in the Japanese world. But there's definitely in this book, there is a lot to say about foreigners in Japan who come to Japan and remain foreigners in Japan throughout their time here, and sort of how they're always going to be the outside. And with this industry, it shows how men really look down on foreign women because they're supposed to be easy and they're supposed to be easily conquerable, and there's nothing redeeming about foreign women. They're just abrasive and harsh, and they're not very feminine. And the only reason we hire them to drink with us is because, us as men, we like to show that we have power over all these foreigners. So it's very interesting. There's a lot to take from this book. And I mean, I read this in 3-4 days because I couldn't put it down. I just kept turning the pages. And it is long, and I mean, he's very, very thorough. I mean, he'll talk about the family dog. There's not even a family dog, but if there were, he would, and it would have a backstory. So he gets into a lot of detail. And for some readers, maybe that could bog you down, but I really like this. I thought it was fascinating. The next book I read, I just needed a short book because I was doing some long train rides, and so I picked up Amelie Nothomb's Riquet à la houppe. There isn't much to say about this. It's a standard Amelie Nothomb. I haven't read her in a while because I'm a little tired of her. I think this is like the 20th book I've read by her, and they're quite formulaic. And the thing about Amelie Nothomb is that when I read her, I enjoy her, but once I'm done, I kind of forget about her. She's quirky, she's fun, she has all these ideas, but unfortunately she has, I don't know if it's her decision or just the marketing of her publishing company, but it's basically she brings out a book every year, and when you do that, there's only so much you can do, and there's only so many ways you can push yourself when you're on that kind of deadline. And so she has all these ideas that are really, really great and really fun, but she never really explores them in a way that I think she could and that I think would really up her writing. So she's really good for train rides and when you need something quick and easy to read. And this is actually one of her better ones, I think, but it's still, it's still middle grade compared to her earlier work. But basically this is about this boy and this girl, and the boy is born and he's disfigured, he's ugly, he's basically supposed to be the disgrace of humanity almost, but he's very, very smart, so he's able to be very resilient. And on the other hand, there's a little girl who's been born at the same time of him who's very beautiful, and but she becomes very cold and very distant, and she doesn't really interact with the environment around her, and she kind of lets the environment interact upon her. And it basically goes through their life stories as how they grow up and then how their lives end up intertwining at the end. These are definitely themes that Amelie Nothomb has explored before, in terms of like the precocious child, the child who has superior intelligence, who kind of thinks he's better, well, not he, but like kind of thinks they're better than everybody else, and sort of like the baby who, obviously from an adult's perspective a baby can't do much, but actually the baby can do. He just doesn't have the motor functions to do the things that they want to do. So a lot of like similar things in her previous she's explored in previous books, but this is the better one. But yeah, Riquet à la houppe. If you read French, this is a good one. It's not one of her. She has some books that are hard that I think have like really, really hard vocabulary. This one is not one of those. So this one's definitely readable. Should it be translated into English? I don't think anyone needs to waste their time doing that. But if you do read French and you do need a short read, this is actually one of her better ones. Next was the book that I really decided to take my time with because it was so fascinating and so good, and I really should have done a video on it by itself, but that's something I need to explore in the future about how I want to do that. But that is the nonfiction book, The Gate of Heavenly Peace, The Chinese and the Revolution by Jonathan D. Spence. Jonathan D. Spence is a historian, I believe, at Yale University. And he is just fantastic. When it comes to Chinese history, he cannot be overdone. He's just fantastic. I've read his God's Chinese Son, which is fascinating. Once again, sort of like Christianity, and then that one also discusses the Boxer Rebellion. I've read his Death of Woman Wang, which is fantastic, but very different because, I mean, basically, that one is just like him exploring this old village in China via its tax documents, which who knows who could do that, but he makes tax documents very, very interesting. So Jonathan Spence is very, very, very amazing, very, very good. If you want Chinese history, you should definitely go to him because he's fantastic. And this one is basically from the history of China and all the revolutions from about 1896 to about 1976. So it spans a quite a large basically about 80 years, a large range, but it basically goes from the end of the imperial system into communism, basically, and how communism came into the country. And it's told not in the point of view of the main key figures in China's history of this time, in terms of like Mao Zedong, and then Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek and all of them. They obviously figure into this book, but this is about basically the intellectual sphere, the literary sphere, the people, the playwrights of this generation and their role in these revolutions, and how basically the government had manipulated the people to have influence on the intellectuals, while also the government was manipulating the intellectuals to have influence on the people. And it's just, I mean, it's fascinating. It's, oh gosh, this book though, there's so much in it, because I mean, I knew China had a chaotic history at this time of period, but I did not know it was this chaotic. It was ridiculous. And the thing that's really amazing about this book is that if you were to read just a general history textbook, or if you were to read the textbook in your school, you know, it's always like Boxer Rebellion, and then maybe like it gives you topics about that and the key points and the key figures you need to know. And then after that, it'll have, okay, this rebellion, but it'll jump from like all the main events within a historical period. But with this, you get year after year after year. And so you're just in the continuous flow of these revolutions and how they connect with them, and how the mindset changes, and how, you know, at one point communism is leading, and the other times the sort of more democratic party is leading, and maybe like the imperial, the feeling to maybe we should go back to imperial system or have a democratic monarchy, and how there's a push and pull and wane and all these things, and you're led year by year, and you kind of like, all of a sudden you find yourself in 1912, and all of a sudden now you're in 1926, and now you're in 1942, and all of a sudden you see yourself, you know, having gone through all these years and all the struggles, and you've seen the political manipulation and the mental manipulation, and this mob mentality as you go through all these years, and all of a sudden you're in communism. And it's really amazing to see how it kind of snuck up on China. China had a chance to go and to actually have a very democratic society, and to have a really, really forward-thinking society. I mean, at the beginning of the book, I mean, there's this one intellectual, I believe, I mean, I'm not good with Chinese names, it's not, That's not what I studied. I studied Japan, but I think it was Kang Yofei. And I mean, his thoughts about, he's reflecting on American politics and the suppression of black people in America. And he was, reflecting that into China, that we can't do that. We can't have that thing. We cannot separate our Chinese people based on race. He's also talking about women and how, we need to stop foot binding, and we need to give them the power of divorce and stop these arranged marriages and really give people the choice for women and men to be equal. And they're so forward thinking in that. And it's really, really amazing when you see how China is now and how it kind of sort of developed into this very communist society. There's so much about the literature at the time, the playwrights. Lao She, I believe it's actually Lao She, is one of the most famous Chinese writers. And you see how at the very, very beginning he was very forward thinking as well, and very quick to criticize the government, to criticize the politics at the time, to criticize Chinese society at the time. And then he went abroad, and he did have issues abroad. He did struggle immersing himself in foreign culture. But when he came back to China, which after communism had been established, he found it just as difficult, and all of a sudden the Communist Party was forcing him to change his viewpoints to fit the communist viewpoint. And it's so fascinating, and there is so much I could talk about this, and I really regret that I didn't follow my reading as I was reading this, because I mean there's so much I could talk about this, and it's hard. It's a very, very hard read. I would say you do probably need to already have a good grasp of Chinese history before you read this, because as I said, it doesn't give you the main players of Chinese history. It really talks about these, the literary side, the intellectuals of the society during this long period of time, which are people that are not focused on during, in history books. History books follows history, it follows politics mostly, and how that sort of affects society. But in this book, it's really about how society affects politics, and it's really amazing. It's amazing the switch people do. Is it survival? Is it mob mentality? Is it not just sort of puppeteering the mind of the people? And it's fantastic. So on a lighter note, I read one manga this month, just one, and that is the second volume of the original Trigun. Very fun, very interesting, just like the anime, just how I remembered. Now I need to start the Trigun Maximum series, which is the part that I'm less familiar with, that I don't remember as much, and I don't know how far the anime went in terms of that, so that will be very, very interesting. And yeah, that's what I read in October. Don't know what's in store for me in November. Oh no, I have something else I wanted to say. Oh no, I have to stop this little outro. I also wanted to give one book recommendation. This is a book, Anna. It's called Anna, and this is a book I read in Japanese when it first came out about 5 years ago. It won the Akutagawa Prize, and it has just gotten translated into English. It is called The Whole. And this book was marvelous. How marvelous was it? As I was reading the book, I wanted to translate it. I wanted to be the translator of this book. And I knew it would do well. And I actually kick myself, because I think I would have done a wonderful job. But I'm not a translator. That's not my job. I'm a chemist. But I was so inspired by this book that I really, really wanted to translate it. I mean, I can't tell you the dreams I had where I was translating this book. That's how impassioned I was about it. Anna is by the same person, Hiroko Oyamada, who wrote The Factory, which I also really enjoyed. I actually read this one in English just to, switch things up a little bit. But yeah, Anna was the original one I read, and it's about this woman who leaves her job because her husband is being transferred back to his countryside, back to his hometown in the countryside, and so she leaves her job to follow him. And because they're going back to his hometown, they decide to rent the home behind his parents' home. And while he's at work, she kind of just becomes his housewife. And she explores the terrain, and one day she falls in this hole. And from there, her world becomes very surreal, and it becomes very almost fantastical. There are things that happen where you're like, is this really happening? Are these characters real? And it has so much to say about women's place in society, about the men in Japan and how unsupportive they are of their wives, and how selfish they quite are, and how they leave their wives to be in these situations where basically they have nothing to do anymore. They have nothing to show their worth anymore other than just, clean the house basically. So this was really beautiful, really fantastic. I'm still kicking myself that I'm not the one that translated this, because I really wanted it. I wanted it so bad. I should have done it. I should have just done it. Even for like a project for fun, I should have done it. So yeah, I really, really wanted to recommend this because it just came out this October. It's readily available if you want to read it, and that's The Hole. And the cover is green because it's just a field of grass. Very, very lovely cover. And it's by the same people who did this, which is New Directions Press. So it's kind of, it's just as short as this, and the exact same size, and it's just the cover is of a grass field. So yeah, I wanted to mention that in this video as well, that if you're interested, this was a fantastic book. I absolutely loved it, and it's a great read that I recommend to everyone. So yeah, this is the new outro to this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys again in my next video. Thanks.